Hello. Okay, so the embuggerance I want to talk to you about today is selective or situational mutism. Although when planning this video I realised I'm not really able to talk about my experience of that without bleeding over into derealisation disorder, we'll touch on that moderately as well. So the first point I want to make is that the selective part does not mean consciously selective. It's not a deliberate thing, nor is it something over which I have much control. For a lot of autists, it's a thing over which they have no control whatsoever. So I count myself very lucky that it has a fairly infrequent effect on me. And just to be really bloody clear, it just means that whilst you can speak normally, usually, sometimes the little speaky bit doesn't fucking work, no matter what you try. And whilst we're on the subject of clarity, the NHS definition of derealisation disorder is where you feel the world around is unreal. People and things around you may seem lifeless or foggy. So now you know, that's the official definition. So whilst I usually come across as quiet, but without any real speech difficulty, it's really a case of the serene duck, bobbing peacefully on the surface with the legs going frantically underneath. I do tend to stutter when I'm nervous or when I'm in an unfamiliar situation, and when it's something like ordering in a restaurant or asking a sales assistant a question, I have to rehearse the lines in my head or under my breath, so I'm the one who's muttering in the queue, so I can be fairly confident that when I finally get to the counter, they'll come out, and they may even come out smoothly. And I've been learning German on and off now for a while now, and while I have even more trouble in getting a sentence out in a language with which I'm less familiar, I found that it can be quite useful at times, given that along with a lot of people, my worst stuttering, and yes, stuttering and stammering are the same thing, my worst stuttering occurs in sentences starting with the dreaded W. So, framing the question in German with a far easier starting phonic can trick my brain as getting it right when I translate back. It's why I also tend to use fairly formal grammar in spoken English, because it allows me to do away with horrible sentences like, fuck's sake, now I'm doing it. See, pressure of camera. Allows me to do away with sentences like, when are we going? And replace them with the far more palatable, at what time are we leaving? There's not always a substitute, so reversed or blunt sentences are common at home and becoming more common when I'm out and about, because I'm really giving a fuck. So things like tea is what, or said they did what. It's just easier. Trouble also comes in conversation, because I'm so anxiously trying to work out what to say in order to best pass for human, and to mask or hide amongst them, when I'm holding an interesting and relevant comment in my head for so long, waiting to try and insert it into the conversation. By the time there's a lull in which I can speak, not only is the comment probably fucking irrelevant, but I've built it up so much in my head that it comes out incorrectly, or I glitch, or I stutter badly, or I just blurt out what I want to say then and there so I can actually say something, and I come across as rude. But it's at times of extreme or prolonged stress that I go completely mute. And interestingly, to me at least, I've noticed two opposing types of problem that cause this. Different approaches, same result. And the first is overload. When there's just too much external stimuli. I don't know why I wear this hat, it's just moving the whole time. The first is overload. So when there's too much external stimulation, it's too loud, too bright, too many people, too many streams of information. When I've started to manically multitask on far too many things at once, and I'm gonna do a video on over-exuberant multitasking, because my God, that can get insane. My brain just runs faster and faster, and in order to keep up with everything, so it either outpaces my mouth entirely, or the circuit breaker in my head just flips. In order to devote most of the processing power to dealing with the incoming information, non-essential processes like speech, social niceties, or memory shut down. That was mostly the case when I was younger, undiagnosed, unofficially medicated, and trying desperately to be the human I saw around me. I was, as I say, self-medicating in those days. And the combination of factors just caused more fuses to blow, and problematic behaviours to come out as I tried anything in order to cope. It was interesting times, you know. But the worst mutism I had, and I'm really fucking grateful that this is the worst I've ever had, was 6 months when I was in a psych ward. I was, as I say, living in interesting times, and we all know what that means now. Interesting in my personal life, and everything just built up to several fuses blowing, and my proving not to be overly suited to living with NTs. One of the things, therefore, that went was my speech, but not with everyone. I had one person to whom I spoke about everything, literally running my thought processes past them. Fuck knows how they coped, but I was doing it in order to check what was a sane pattern of thought or a sane behaviour, so that person was, looking back on it, an extension of my own head. So whilst I could speak mostly normally to them, other people just got a breathy silence when I tried to address them. So, hello, person to whom I'm speaking. Yeah. Don't want to start myself. So yeah, I spent 6 months either addressing that person with other people just eavesdropping, or writing down everything I needed to say on paper. And this was in the days before proper smartphones. I carried a pad and a pen, or a couple of pens, because, you know, if one doesn't work, you have to have a spare. Which isn't brilliant when your handwriting is fucking illegible. And it certainly uses up far too much of your tightly allotted time with a doctor or therapist. But as I say, that was 10 plus years ago now. And since then, I've been a lot more heavily medicated, and I'll do a video on why that is both heaven and hell. And I've made myself a lot more aware of my own mental processes and how my own brain functions. I literally got myself to the point of, this life hasn't been working for you, what else can we try? And on this new path, as I've got older, I've become more detached. And I'm going to do a full video on this, probably next week. But I've become more detached, not only from society, as I've quietly removed myself from the human race, and not only as I've understood derealisation disorder more deeply, but more detached from the very meat suit I inhabit. I've always felt like an alien living amongst humans. It's a very common experience amongst autists. I've never felt one of them, never one of the humans. I've never understood the things which they seem to take for granted. I've never really got it, and I've always felt other. And over the years, I've studied them, and I've done the observations and the thought experiments wherein I take apart their society and I examine it piece by piece, and I put it back together to see how it works. And mostly now, I understand why they do what they do, or at least know why they do what they do, and I can predict mostly what behaviours I'll need for what situations. But it still doesn't come naturally, and pop culture is just a closed fucking book, and it moves so fast. And yeah, so I've allowed myself to become more detached, to not stress about masking 100% of the time, to not worry so much about which reality is the real one. And the few people I do have around me now are the ones who allow me to be myself and who don't get too annoyed when I glitch. The ones who get that if I don't respond, I've literally been somewhere else, or I think I have. The ones who mostly understand, and this is still a huge thing, they mostly understand when I've had a conversation with them, a full, real conversation that's absolute clarity of memory, but they haven't actually been involved with it. It's, my reality and theirs are trousers of timing. So a conversation they've not actually been personally involved. And as a result, I've become less suicidally miserable, which is a plus, and I've become less likely to have a full-on psychotic break, which is also a bonus. But I've become less of a danger to myself, certainly, and less of a danger to those around me, because I'm not going to react unpredictably. But it has left me more detached. Derealisation disorder, coupled with the medication I take, has left things happening at a distance. They're over there. Like, you're seeing me through a screen. That's how I see the end of the sofa. I exist in the bubble of my head. It's really, it's a first-person meat suit simulator. But imagine you're playing a first-person game, so Dishonored or Skyrim or something. It's a first-person meat suit simulator. Sometimes I have control, and sometimes I'm just watching a cutscene. So nothing's 100% real anymore. People who aren't the few with whom I have direct contact, whose reality is thrust upon me, are NPCs with really well-programmed AI. Nothing ever really connects. And that's from the sound of people's voices. I mean, ignore the, oh, you don't connect emotionally. That's a whole other fucking unexploded bomb. But that's from the sound of people's voices to the smoke coming from the kitchen. It's all on the other side of the plexiglass. And I can take or leave at any given point. And this disconnection, this derealisation, this life simulator has led to selective mutism. Not because I'm getting overly stimulated anymore, overly involved, although that does happen on a far too regular basis when I have to do stuff for which I'm not prepared, but because I've just become so insular. If everything's too much in this reality, I can just pick another one and leave the meat suit on pause, but even when I come back to it, my brain is so far from the suit that the process of collecting the thought in a coherent manner, formulating the script, sending it down to the vocab processing unit, then to the vocal cords, then to the mouth, to translate that free-form opinion, that free-form thought, into coherent speech is just too much. Like, oftentimes I'll get as far as the words are sounding in my head, the words exist up here, but it's just too exhausting to send it any further, to go through any more of the bloody process. And if it's just an everyday conversation about, I don't know, what we're having for tea, or the fucking weather, being English, exerting the effort to lift a car-sized weight in order to venture an opinion on, frankly, on a banality, just isn't worth it. And it's the same thing that happens when I glitch, that there's no connection. If you've seen my other videos, you'll know that I'm not the best person in the kitchen. And that is because I'll look at the smoke pouring out of the oven and vaguely notice the fact that it's hot. But I won't necessarily connect the two things with, that's on fire, I need to do something about it. You know what's going on, but there's no connection to a physical process in response. You stand with the glass on the counter, the bottle of drink in hand, screaming, pour the drink into the glass, pour the fucking drink into the fucking glass. But getting your arm involved to actually do that is beyond you, and the two just don't link up. So yeah, when you burn yourself because you've taken the tray out of the oven and it's hot, but you're looking at the plates and trying to work out what happens to make the food go from the tray to the plate. Then you realise you're getting hot, then realise that it hurts, then yell and drop the tray, but not connect that throbbing burn in your hand with an injury until someone comes in response to your yell and physically puts your hand under the tap. It's a problem. And it's the same thing with speech. The flappy bit on your face, that funnels sound from your innards in a variety of manners, is just too far away. And you can't remember how it works. It's so peaceful jumping between realities that it just doesn't seem worth it. It's like having a box in your head that contains speech, and you need to crowbar it open. But at that point, you can't see the box, and the crowbar's vanished, and you're drunk anyway. And when you come back, and when you want to be a part of the meat suit's world and experience that which everyone else is having, it's a fucking horrible realization. But it's then self-perpetuating, because the quieter you are, the more peaceful it is, and the more insular you become, the harder speech becomes, and the harder the physical reality connection becomes, ad nauseum, ad infinitum, until eventually you reach the logical conclusion that you could just float away and not bother to come back. And believe me, that's very nearly happened on several occasions. There've been times where I've wanted that little fucking voice who's left in the meat suit control room that's yelling at me, please, deal with the physical bits, come back, deal with the fact that the meat suit's on fire. You just want it to shut the fuck up and let you go. Like, reality is tenuous. And if I'm honest, it's pretty much optional. Sorry, everyone establishes this reality, but this is no more real than anything else. But, okay, let's return from the brink and return to the point, because I'm fairly sure I had one when I started. Selective or situational mutism. You learn to adapt, and the people around you learn to accommodate you, the thanks, inconvenient obligations and demands of which are a whole other video. And you write things down and you play fucking charades, and yes, I know charades is probably physically more effort than producing speech, but no one ever said atypical neurology was narratively convenient. And you use the basic baby signal of pointing to an item and squeaking, and you use sign language, although God knows not actual fucking sign language, because that's logically that'd be more effort. But with the charades, I'm gonna look into that, because that may be pretty. Yeah. You make yourself understood until the miraculous power of the spoken word returns to you, my children, and you cope. But as with everything, that's all you're doing. Just coping. Just existing as you lurch from one embuggerance to the next, wishing you were just like the bastards you see on Facebook who wake up in the mornings and go to work and love their kids and cry when something sad happens and enjoy fucking seeing their fucking friends, and haven't had to deconstruct human society so far that even when the illusion is rebuilt, they can't enjoy it because they just see the moving parts, and they're so cynical and suspicious of everything that there is no glimmer of positive emotion left to be squeezed out of the cold fucking hard granite of a physical reality that they all take for granted. And that's not where I want to leave you. I don't want to leave you with a bleak glimpse behind the curtain and into the void. I want these videos to be something positive I put out into the world. But I also want the reality of this shit to be real. I want it to be on view. Because then, hopefully, someone will remember just a few words of this rant. They'll remember the existence of this video when they see someone struggling to talk. And they'll take those extra few seconds out of their day to allow that person to communicate their needs in their way. To not judge when someone isn't speaking. And to not blank them or think their opinion isn't worth hearing because they don't verbally express it. And to just, as ever, take a minute to try and be a little kind. That's all. Just a little kind. Thank you. Bye.